will describe the minimum conception of morality. As the name suggests, the minimum conception is the core that every moral theory should accept, at least as a starting point. First, however, we'll examine three moral controversies. This discussion will bring out the features of the minimum conception. First example, Baby Teresa. An infant known to the public as Baby Teresa was born in Florida in 1992. Baby Teresa had anencephaly, one of the worst genetic disorders. Anencephalic infants are sometimes referred to as babies without brains, but that's not quite accurate. Important parts of the brain, the cerebrum and cerebellum, are missing, as is the top of the skull. The brainstem, however, is still there, and so the baby can breathe and possess a heartbeat. Most cases of anencephaly are detected during pregnancy, and the fetuses are usually aborted. Of those not aborted, half are stillborn. Only a few hundred are born alive each year, and they usually die within days. Baby Teresa's story is remarkable only because her parents made an unusual request. Knowing that their baby would die soon and could never be conscious, Teresa's parents volunteered her organs for immediate transplant. They thought that her kidneys, liver, heart, lungs, and eyes should go to other children who could benefit from them. Her physicians agreed. Thousands of infants need transplants each year, and there are never enough organs available. But Teresa's organs were not taken because Florida law forbids the removal of organs until the donor has died. By the time Baby Teresa died, 9 days later, it was too late. Her organs had deteriorated too much to be harvested and transplanted. Baby Teresa's case was widely debated. Should she have been killed so that her organs could have been used to save other children? Other opinions were divided, but we're interested in more than what people happen to believe. We want to know what's true. Were the parents right or wrong to volunteer their baby's organs for transplant? To answer this question, we have to ask what reasons or arguments can be given on each side. What can be said for or against the parents' request? The benefits argument. The parents believed that Teresa's organs were doing her no good because she was not conscious and was bound to die soon. The other children, however, could be helped. Thus, the parents seem to have reasoned, if we can benefit someone without harming anyone else, we ought to do so. Transplanting the organs would benefit the other children without harming Baby Teresa. Therefore, we ought to transplant the organs. Is this correct? Not every argument is sound. In addition to knowing what arguments can be given for review, we also want to know whether those arguments are any good. Generally speaking, an argument is sound if its assumptions are true and the conclusion follows logically from them. In this case, the argument has two assumptions: that we should help someone if no harm would come of it, and that the transplant would help the other children without harming Teresa. We might wonder, however, about the claim that Teresa wouldn't be harmed. After all, she would die, and isn't being alive better than being dead? But on reflection, it seems clear that in these tragic circumstances, the parents were right. Being alive is a benefit only if you can carry on activities and have thoughts, feelings, and relations with other people. In other words, if you have a life. Without such things, biological existence has no value. Therefore, even though Teresa might remain alive for a few more days, it would do her no good. The benefits argument, therefore, provides a powerful reason for transplanting the organs. What arguments exist on the other side? The argument that we should not use people as means. The ethicists who oppose the transplants offered two arguments. The first was based on the idea that it's wrong to use people as a means to other people's ends. Taking Teresa's organs would be using her to benefit other children, therefore it should not be done. Is this argument sound? The idea that we should not use people is appealing, but what exactly does it mean? Using people typically involves violating their autonomy, their ability to decide for themselves how to live their own lives according to their own desires and values. A person's autonomy may be violated through manipulation, trickery, or deceit. For example, I may pretend to be your friend when I'm only interested in going out with your sister. In each case, I'm manipulating you in order to get something for myself. Autonomy is also violated when people are forced to do things against their will. Taking baby Teresa's organs, however, could not thwart her autonomy because she has no autonomy. She cannot make decisions, she has no desires, and she cannot value anything. Would taking her organs be using her in any other morally significant way? We would, of course, be using her organs for someone else's benefit, but we do that every time we perform a transplant. We would also be using her organs without her permission. Would that make it wrong? If we were using those organs against her wishes, then that would be a reason for objecting. It would violate her autonomy. But baby Teresa has no wishes. When people are unable to make decisions for themselves and others must step in, there are two reasonable guidelines that might be adopted. First, we might ask, what would be in their own best interest? If we apply this standard to baby Teresa, there would be no problem with taking her organs, for, as we've already noted, her interests will not be affected. She is not conscious, and she will die soon no matter what. The second guideline appeals to the person's own preferences. We might ask, if she could tell us what she wants, what would she say? This sort of thought is useful when we're dealing with people who have preferences or once had them, but cannot express them. For example, a comatose patient who signed a living will before slipping into the coma. But sadly, we can get no guidance from baby Teresa, even in our imaginations. The upshot is that we're left to do what we think is best. The argument from the wrongness of killing. Some people appeal to the principle that it is wrong to kill one person to save another. Taking Teresa's organs would be killing her to save others, they said, so taking the organs would be wrong. Is this argument sound? The prohibition against killing is certainly among the most important moral rules. Nevertheless, few people believe it's always wrong to kill. Most people think there are exceptions, such as killing in self-defense. The question then is whether taking baby Teresa's organs should be regarded as another exception. There are many reasons to think so. Baby Teresa is not conscious. She'll never have a life. She's going to die soon, and taking her organs would help the other babies. Anyone who accepts this will regard the argument as flawed. Usually it's wrong to kill one person to save another, but not always. There's another possibility. Perhaps we should regard baby Teresa as already dead. If this sounds crazy, bear in mind that our conception of death has changed over the years. In 1969, a doctor performed the first heart transplant in a human being. This was an exciting development. Heart transplants could potentially save many lives. However, back then, American law understood death as occurring when the heart stops beating. But once a heart stops beating, it quickly degrades and becomes unsuitable for transplant. Thus, under American law, it was not clear whether any hearts could be legally harvested for transplant. So American law changed. We now understand death as occurring not when the heart stops beating, but when the brain stops functioning. Brain death is our new end-of-life standard. This solved the problem about transplants. Anencephalics do not meet the technical requirements for brain death as that term is currently defined, but perhaps the definition should be revised to include them. After all, they lack any hope of conscious life because they have no cerebrum or cerebellum. If the definition of brain death were reformulated to include anencephalics, then we would become accustomed to the idea that these unfortunate infants are stillborn, and so taking their organs would not involve killing them. The argument for wrongness of killing would then be irrelevant. On the whole, then, the arguments in favor of transplanting baby Teresa's organs seem stronger than the arguments against it. Second example, Jody and Mary. In 2000, a young woman discovered that she was carrying conjoined twins. Knowing that the healthcare facilities in her home country couldn't handle such a birth, she and her husband went to England. The infants, known as Mary and Jody, were joined at the lower abdomen. Their spines were fused, and they had one heart and one pair of lungs between them. Jody, the stronger one, was providing blood for her sister. No one knows how many sets of conjoined twins are born each year, but the number seems to be in the hundreds. Most die shortly after birth, but some do well. However, the outlook for Mary and Jody was grim. The doctors said that without intervention, the girls would die within 6 months. The only hope was an operation to separate them. This would save Jody, but Mary would die immediately. The parents opposed the operation on the grounds that it would hasten Mary's death. Quote, "We believe that nature should take its course," they said. "If it's God will that both of our children should die and should not survive, then so be it." The hospital, hoping to save Jody, petitioned the courts for permission to perform the operation anyway. The courts agreed and the operation was performed. As expected, Jody lived and Mary died. In thinking about this case, we should distinguish the question of who should make the decision from the question of what the decision should be. You might think, for example, that the parents should be the ones to decide, and so the courts were wrong to intrude. But there remains the separate question of what would be the wisest choice for the parents or anybody else to make. We will focus on that question. Would it be right or wrong to separate the twins? The argument that we should save as many lives as we can. The rationale for separating the twins is that we have a choice between saving one infant or letting both die. Isn't it plainly better to save one? This argument is so appealing that many people will conclude without further thought that the twins should be separated. A poll showed that 78% approved of the operation. People were obviously persuaded by the idea that we should save as many as we can. Jody and Mary's parents, however, believe that there's an even stronger argument on the other side. The argument from the sanctity of human life. The parents loved both of their children, and they thought it would be wrong to kill one of them, even to save the other. Of course, they were not alone in thinking this. The idea that all human life is precious is at the core of the Western moral tradition. In traditional ethics, the prohibition against killing innocent humans is absolute. It does not matter if the killing would serve a good purpose. Mary is an innocent human being, and so she may not be killed. Is this argument sound? The judges who heard the case did not think so, for a surprising reason. They denied that the operation would kill Mary. The judge said that the operation would merely separate Mary from her sister, and then she would die, not because she was intentionally killed, but because her own body cannot sustain her life. In other words, the operation wouldn't kill her, her body's weakness would, and so the morality of killing is irrelevant. This response, however, misses the point. It doesn't matter whether we say that the operation caused Mary's death or that her body's weakness did. Either way, she'll be dead, and we will have knowingly have hastened that death. That's the idea behind the traditional prohibition against killing the innocent. There is, however, a more natural objection to the argument from the sanctity of life. Perhaps it is not always wrong to kill innocent human beings. For example, such killings may be right when A, the innocent human has no future because she's going to die soon no matter what. B, the innocent human has no wish to go on living, perhaps because she has no wishes at all. And C, this killing will save others who can go on to lead full lives. In these rare circumstances, the killing of the innocent might be justified. Third and final example, Tracy Latimer. Tracy Latimer, a 12-year-old victim of cerebral palsy, was killed by her father. One Sunday morning, while his wife and other children were away, Robert Latimer put Tracy in the cab of his pickup truck and piped in exhaust fumes until she died. At the time of her death, Tracy weighed less than 40 pounds, and despite being 12 years old, she was described as functioning at the mental level of a 3-month-old baby. Mrs. Latimer said that she was relieved to find her daughter Tracy dead when she arrived home. She said that she didn't have the courage to do it herself. Robert Latimer was tried for murder, but the judge and jury did not want to treat him harshly. The jury found him guilty of only 1 second-degree murder and recommended that the judge ignore the mandatory 10-year sentence. But the Supreme Court stepped in and ruled that the mandatory sentence must be imposed. Robert Latimer entered prison in 2001 and was paroled in 2008. Legal questions aside, did Mr. Latimer do anything wrong? This case involves many of the issues that we saw in other cases. One argument is that Tracy's life was morally precious, and so her father had no right to kill her. In his defense, it may be said that Tracy's condition was so catastrophic that she had no prospects of a life in any but a biological sense. Her existence consisted in pointless suffering, and so killing her was an act of mercy. Considering those arguments, it appears that Robert Latimer acted defensively. His critics, however, made other points. The argument from the wrongness of discriminating. When the trial court gave Robert Latimer a lenient sentence, many handicapped people felt insulted. Some said, "Nobody has the right to decide my life is worth less than yours. That's the bottom line." Tracy was killed because she was handicapped, he said, and that is unconscionable. Handicapped people should be given the same respect and accorded the same rights as everybody else. Should we think of the death of Tracy Latimer as a case of discrimination against the handicapped? Robert Latimer argued that Tracy's cerebral palsy was not the issue. Quote, "People are saying this is a handicap issue, but they're wrong. It was about mutilation and torture for Tracy." Just before her death, Tracy had undergone major surgery on her back, hips, and legs, and more surgery was planned. With the combination of a feeding tube, rods in her back, the leg cut, and flopping around in bed sores, said her father, "How can people say she was a happy little girl?" At the trial, 3 of Tracy's physicians testified about the difficulty of controlling her pain. Thus, Mr. Latimer denied that Tracy was killed because of her disability. She was killed because she was suffering without hope of relief. The slippery slope argument. Some people argued that letting Mr. Latimer go without time in prison would have really been the slippery slope and opening the doors to other people to decide who should live and who should die. We may feel sympathy for Robert Latimer, it was said. We may even think that Tracy Latimer is better off dead. However, it's dangerous to think this way. If we accept any sort of mercy killing, we will slide down a slippery slope, and at the bottom of the slope, all life will be held cheap. Where will we draw the line? What about the elderly, the infirm, and other useless members of society? In this context, Hitler is often mentioned, implying that we'll end up like the Nazis if we take the first step. Similar slippery slope arguments have been used on other issues. Abortion, in vitro fertilization, and human cloning have all been denounced because of what they might lead to. Sometimes in hindsight, it's evident that the worries were unfounded. When Louise Brown, the first test tube baby, was born in 1978, there were dire predictions about what might be in store for her and for society as a whole. But none of those predictions came true, and IVF, or in vitro fertilization, has become routine. Since Louise Brown's death, over 100,000 American couples have used IVF to have children. Without the benefit of hindsight, however, slippery slope arguments are hard to assess. Those inclined to defend Mr. Latimer may find the dire predictions unrealistic, while those inclined to condemn him may find the prediction sensible. So if you're opposed to something but have no good arguments against it, you can always make up a prediction about what it might lead to, and no matter how implausible your prediction is, no one can prove you wrong. Conclusion. Reason and impartiality. What can we learn from all this about the nature of morality? For starters, we may note 2 points. First, moral judgments must be backed by good reasons. And second, morality requires the impartial consideration of each individual's interests. The cases of baby Teresa, Jody and Mary, and Tracy Latimer are all liable to arouse strong feelings. Such feelings might be admirable. They might be a sign of moral seriousness. However, they can also get in the way of discovering the truth. When we feel strongly about an issue, it's tempting to assume that we simply know what the truth is without even having to consider the arguments. Unfortunately, however, we cannot rely on our own feelings, no matter how powerful they may be. Our feelings may be irrational. They may be the products of prejudice, selfishness, or cultural conditioning. At one time, for example, people's feelings told them that members of other races were inferior and that slavery was God's plan. Moreover, people's feelings vary. In the case of Tracy Latimer, some people feel strongly that her father deserved a long prison term. Other people support the father passionately. But both of these feelings cannot be correct. If we assume that our view must be correct simply because we hold it, then we're just being arrogant. Thus, if we want to discover the truth, we must let our feelings be guided as much as possible by reason. This is the essence of morality. The morally right thing to do is always the thing best supported by the arguments. The fundamental point is this: if someone says that you ought to do such and such, then you may legitimately ask why. And if no good reason can be given, then you may reject the advice as arbitrary or unfounded. In this way, moral judgments are different from expressions of personal taste. There's no such thing as rationally defending one's like or dislike of the taste of coffee. On the other hand, if someone says that something is morally wrong, he does need reasons, and if his reasons are legitimate, then other people should accept their force. By the same logic, if he has no good reason for what he says, then he's simply making noise and may be ignored. Of course, not every reason that may be advanced is a good reason. There are bad arguments as well as good ones, and much of the skill of moral thinking consists in discerning the difference. But how do we tell the difference? The first thing is to get one's facts straight. This may not be as easy as it sounds. Sometimes key facts are unknown. Other times matters are so complex that even the experts disagree. Yet another problem is human prejudice. Often we want to believe something because it supports our preconceptions. Those who disapprove of Robert Latimer's action, for example, will want to believe the dire predictions of the slippery slope argument, while those who approve of his actions will want to reject those dire predictions. Yet, facts exist apart from our wishes, and if we want to think intelligently, then we need to try to see things as they are. Next, we can bring moral principles into play. In our examples, a number of general principles were involved: that we should not use people, that we should not kill one person to save another, that we should do what will benefit the people affected by our actions, that every life is sacred, and that it is wrong to discriminate against the handicapped. Most moral arguments consist of general principles being applied to particular cases, and so we must ask whether those principles are justified and whether they're being applied correctly. Arguments can go wrong in many ways, and we must always be open to encountering new kinds of error. This paints a picture of what it means to be a conscientious moral agent. The conscientious moral agent is someone who is concerned impartially with the interests of everyone affected by what he or she does, who carefully sifts facts and examines their implications, who accepts principles of conduct only after scrutinizing them to make sure that they are justified, who is willing to listen to reason even when it means revising prior convictions, and who, finally, is willing to act on these deliberations. This picture of the moral agent has been disputed in various ways. However, theories that reject the minimum conception encounter serious difficulties. This is why most moral theories embrace the minimum conception in one form or another.